So it's Star Wars Day. And if these back here, and Admiral Akbar up in the corner didn't give it away, I kind of like Star Wars. And a couple of years ago on Star Wars Day, I put out a video.
But then Rian Johnson goes and screws this all up. How can you give this absolute legend a lame as hell off-screen death, which no one reacts to in the slightest, and has no effect on anyone throughout the rest of the story?
With a crappy text-to-speech voice because my voice was gone and I really wanted to put out a video for Star Wars Day, talking about something that I wanted to fix with Star Wars. And this year I thought I'm actually going to be a bit more positive and talk about why I'm optimistic about the future of Star Wars. Now in my book that is, yes, it's a Darth Vader book, I've got a few notes written down of the things that I'm really looking forward to the most in Star Wars and why it gives me a bit of hope for where it's going now. Because I will admit there have been bits of recent Star Wars that have made me think I'm not 100% sure on where I think this is all going. I think in the last few years I'm a lot more on board, and with some of the stuff that we've seen announced, say at Star Wars Celebration or just in the last few months in general, I am a lot more confident with where I think Star Wars is going, and I am very optimistic. I'm going to open with the big one we knew we were getting for ages, Andor Season 2. Now Andor Season 1 is top tier Star Wars for me, and when you get a series that goes into it knowing how long it's going to be, how many seasons they're going to do, that means they can plot out the full story they are trying to tell in the exact length they want to do. Going into Andor, they knew they were doing 2 seasons, so they knew to plan out a story that took 2 seasons. And if Season 2 is anywhere near as good as Season 1 was, we're going to be in for one hell of a ride. Andor did such an incredible job of telling such a grounded story that still you felt that it was going on about the entire plot within the whole galaxy at that point in time, but still was very much the personal story of the individual characters they were trying to tell stories about. And it set up so many threads that you can take on in Season 2 in Season 1 that you know that it's not like it's so much that you think, how the hell are they going to wrap all this up in one season? It feels like they have got that balance of how much to set up for how much they've got left to go so brilliantly, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact, like I said, they knew going in they were doing 2 seasons. But if I could make one request for Season 2, can we confirm that Corporal Kimsey's not dead? Can we bring him back, please? Because, I mean, look at that moustache. That thing is majestic. Next on my list is something that we got announced at Star Wars Celebration. The post-Rise of Skywalker rebuilding of the Jedi Order by Rey, and the film that we're getting for that. The reason I'm so optimistic about that is because I really want to get a story where we keep moving forward in time, because then we don't know what comes next. Star Wars has done so many things that are technically prequels, because honestly, the majority of Star Wars technically counts as a prequel to something. Even The Mandalorian is a prequel to the sequel trilogy. And I just want to have something at this point where we don't know what comes next at all. That, and it's with the sequel trilogy characters, where I have very mixed feelings about the sequel trilogy as a whole. I'll admit that. I'm one of the people that I think Sam Witwer had a very similar thought process of it, of, you know, there are a lot of people who love the sequels, and I love that they love them. But I'm not as on board as everyone, not say everyone, as a lot of people are. I'm also nowhere near as against them as some people seem to be. Some people seem to think that they're effectively war crimes, with how passionate people seem to get about how bad they think everything Disney Star Wars is. But my main thing that I really enjoyed from the sequel trilogy is I thought they introduced so many brilliant characters, and I think that was the thing that I felt that didn't quite sit right with me at times in the sequel trilogy, was just that it felt like they set up so many great characters. For example, the main one I always come back to is Finn. Finn was a character with so much potential, had such a great actor playing the character in John Boyega, someone who cared so much about Star Wars, and they set him up as like effectively the co-lead of the whole thing, and by the 3rd film he was an afterthought. Basically, like, they kind of like forgot that he had to have a story halfway through that last film, when in reality he probably had the most interesting story of any of the characters. And that's why I am cautiously optimistic about the fact that John Boyega seems to be a bit more on board with Star Wars again from some of the recent interviews he's done, which gives me hope that he is coming back for this film, because it would feel wrong him not being there. They set him up, basically. Like I said, they set him up with the story of him being Force sensitive, which I was buying into from The Force Awakens. And then they just never paid it off in any way. They, like I said, they almost forgot that they'd set anything up halfway through Rise of Skywalker. So it feels so wrong for them not to continue that story in these films. I will say I am a little bit cautious about the fact that it's 15 years later. I feel like that's a bit too much. It feels like they're leaving another big gap between films that they're going to want to fill with something eventually that will then again get to a point where we know where it's going. There's limitations on the stories they can tell. I'd rather they did a jump of, say, 5-10 years, something like that. I mean, it's better than I saw. I can't remember what his name was, but they were talking about one of the original people who was on board to write the film, and people are jumping on, oh, they fired him. Well, apparently his pitch would have been having the film set 60 years later, which at that point you're talking old people, like Ray and Finn and all that. They're old people at that point, which the actors are nowhere near. There's no reason to jump 60 years into the future. You're leaving a giant gap where, again, you know they're going to want to fill that gap with stories at some point where you know where it's going to go. So I'm glad we're getting another Star Wars story where we don't know the ending at all, because we haven't had that since the sequel trilogy. And like I said, where that went in the end went a bit off the rails. And I'm glad the fact that it seems like they're doing one film. They are doing one film. They are telling a story with one film. They're not going straight in and going, we're doing a trilogy. Don't do that. Tell a story first. If you want to then build off that story with more films, good. But just tell one story first. One complete story. And then build off of that if there's good ideas to build off of. Next on my list, Gerazeb Aurelios. That's it. That's literally what I have written down. Do I need to explain it more? I mean, I suppose I should probably explain it more than just naming a character, but I'm just so hyped that we've got him back and in live action, and it's still Steve Blum, and I love Gerazeb Aurelios. Zeb is, I've said this before, I think the most underappreciated Rebels character. I think that there is, I love Zeb. I want more Zeb, and I'm so glad that we're getting him, because there is no way they've just chucked him in one scene of The Mandalorian and that's all we're going to get of him. We're going to get more Zeb at some point. I would assume in Ahsoka, seeing as we're getting Hera and we're getting Sabine and we're getting Chopper and we'll probably get Ezra. You can't just leave Zeb out of that. He's the other member of the Ghost Crew. Well, obviously there's Kanan, but and also like people say, oh, he could come back and they could get Freddie Prinze Jr. playing live action. Freddie Prinze Jr. doesn't want to do it, and I see his point. I'm glad someone has the attitude he has. As we've told the story, we don't need to tell any more of the story, and I'm fully on board with his thought process there. We don't need to always tell more story. Tell the story you want to tell. If there's more story after that, fine, but don't write a story so that you can write more story off of it. And I feel like Freddie Prinze Jr. has said, his Kanan's story is done. He doesn't need any more story for him. But Gerazeb Aurelios, because I love saying his full name for some reason, there's more story to tell there. And honestly, I think a lot of it just comes down to, I do like seeing more of the non-human characters get bigger roles, because basically every lead character is a human. I think I counted it out at one point. Over the entire course of all of Star Wars, there have been, I think, maybe 2 characters that you can maybe claim as main characters who are non-human, maybe 3. And one of those is pretty much Jar Jar Binks in Phantom Menace, where they didn't really tell a story, they just did comic relief all the time. And that's not anything against Ahmed Best, just to clarify. I've said this before, I love Ahmed Best, he's brilliant. But yeah, I just want more Zeb. Keep giving me more Zeb. Give me a Zeb TV show. Go on, do it. You know you want to, Dave Filoni. Now, one of the other films we got announced at Star Wars Celebration was about the Dawn of the Jedi. So set, I can't remember how many thousands of years before the main films that we've got. That is enough time for, we don't know how that story ends. When you're going back in time, I've said about, I'm not overly keen on so many prequels because you know where the story ends. You know the story ends with there being Jedi, but that far back, it's it's far enough away from the main story that they could basically end it how they want. But the main reason why I am so optimistic about it is the director, James Mangold, because he made Logan, and that is one of the best comic book films of all time. It is. I think I have like a top 4, like a clear top 4 that is part of. Logan is just such an incredible story in its own right. It didn't need any of the attack. Obviously, it had Wolverine and it had Professor X in it, but it was able to tell its own story that built off of none of the stories that directly came before it. It was just a Wolverine story that didn't need any build up beyond it. It's just, the character of Wolverine, the character of Professor X, the X-Men exist. That's basically all of the plot that goes in. All that you need to know going into it is vaguely what the characters are, and you can come out of that having seen such an incredible story. And that's why I'm so optimistic about the Dawn of the Jedi film, because we are getting, it's James Mangold. They're putting it in the hands of a filmmaker who I've seen some of their work before and have earned my trust basically to be able to tell a good story. And the fact that they seem to be, again, they've just announced it as a film. They're doing a film. They're not doing a trilogy of films and an animated series and 1,700 books. They are doing a film. They are telling a story. And then sure, if that goes well, I'd assume they'd want to build off of that story more. And even if it goes bad, they'll probably try and build off that story more. But the main part is they are just telling that one story. I mean, overall, I think a lot of my optimism comes from the fact they do seem to be doing a better job of, like, we're going to tell this story, we're going to tell this story, we're going to tell this story. It's not, we're going to do 3 films and then figure out what we're going to put in those 3 films as we go along. It seems to be they are doing a better job now of, at least most of the time, figuring out this is the story we want to tell. Okay, so we're going to do this show, we're going to do this film, rather than we want to make Star Wars things, because that's what it's felt like at times. Is they just want to make Star Wars and then they figure it out as they go along. Now it feels like there's a plan of we want to tell this story. I keep using the word story in this, but that's because it's basically the heart of my optimism is they are actually telling stories, not just making random films. The final thing on my list of reasons for optimism, Bad Batch Season 3. Because Bad Batch Season 2, for a lot of it, there was a lot of good character development, but they were mostly coming in filler episodes, and there was a lot of filler. And then we got the finale, and it gave me probably one of the biggest gut punches Star Wars has ever done, like, emotionally. They took an entire season to make Tech my favourite character just to kill him off. And it's, for as much as I hate it, I know that's why I also love the show, because the best, using the same word again, the best stories are the ones that actually get you emotionally invested, and the ones that can actually bring some form of emotion out of you. That's when you know you've told a good story, when you've actually got the audience to care. And that within that finale of Bad Batch, they got me fully on board again. And the fact again, they're doing one more season. They've said they're doing season 3. That's the final season. There's a story to tell there. I feel like because it feels like they almost like stalled on a bit of the story in season 2, it's because they knew season 3, this is where we're going to put the story. They've got quite a lot of stuff to wrap up in there, and they've got quite a lot of very good ideas about, effectively Clone Revolt. And, I feel like that is a great story that they can tell through the eyes of the Bad Batch. That, I think, knowing that they've got a season left, they will be able to go in, wrap up that story brilliantly. Basically, Star Wars animation is another part of the storytelling that has completely earned my trust at this point after Rebels and Clone Wars. Resistance, I might not have watched the second season of Resistance, I'm going to be honest. I may have done season 1 and gone, I'm not sure this is for me. But Rebels is one of my favourite TV shows of all time, and Clone Wars, I think everyone knows how good Clone Wars is. And I mean, you've got a TV show where most of the main characters are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, and how can you not love D. Bradley Baker? I mean, I pointed out earlier, but you can just about see it back there in that box, I've got the whole batch of Funko Pops, because I went to the Star Wars Celebration animation game night, and after that I walked out like, D. Bradley Baker's just the best. I need to go buy something now. I need to go spend money. So thank you, D. Bradley Baker, for being so entertaining that I needed to go spend way too much money on toys. I'm going to be honest, I mostly just wanted a tech one, and they didn't only have tech. I can only find one that's the whole thing. I'm like, oh no, I have to spend all my money on, getting 5 of them just to get that one. What a shame. But I think my final thing that I want to bring up on why I'm optimistic, I did say the last one was the final one, but this is the real thing that sort of has put me in a more optimistic mood, was Star Wars Celebration. Getting to go to Star Wars Celebration and seeing all of the people who are still so passionate about Star Wars, and seeing people dressed up as General Grievous. That was, like, the cosplay in general was brilliant, but the Grievous one, I think I've seen it online before, and then I saw it in person, like, oh my word, that is incredible. I wish I could be General Grievous. But getting to see all those people there, even if half the time it was spent, standing in giant queues. I mean, it wouldn't be a convention in the UK specifically without having giant queues. Like, you could tell who were the British ones and who were the, people from abroad by the ones who were, trudging like, oh, there's another queue, and the ones just like, yeah, it's a queue, that's how it works. This is the UK. It's like I put a tweet out saying, to all the people who've come to Star Wars Celebration from abroad, this is half of British culture here, just showing a picture of the queue. The other half of British culture is the people yelling, Alan! 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 Al! Alan! Every 5 seconds. Because again, you could tell who was British and who wasn't by who understood the joke and who was really confused and looking for some bloke called Alan. I think that about wraps up me being optimistic, or as some people would describe it, me being a Disney shill, probably. But I just wanted to sort of be happy about Star Wars on Star Wars Day. That's the point. It's a thing that, when it comes down to it, all the people who love Star Wars, they do somehow love it in some way, whether it is actually just through genuinely being positive, or the people who get pissed off at bricks existing in Star Wars. It's because at some point they have truly loved Star Wars. It's just about whether or not you can appreciate the things that are good without letting the things you don't like ruin it, because even if there is a part of Star Wars you don't like, it doesn't mean the parts you do like don't exist anymore. So I'll properly wrap up by saying happy Star Wars Day, may the Force be with you, and Admiral Akbar is definitely not dead.